Easy to play, but hard to master. I'm sure you've heard this phrase to describe games of various types. I feel like the game that we're looking at today is very much an example of this saying. It's a game that only requires you to press 2 different buttons as you play, but can be quite difficult as you progress through it. And this game is One Finger Death Punch. One Finger Death Punch was developed by Silver Dollar Games. It was initially released on the Xbox 360 in June of 2013, but was later released for the PC in March of 2014, and later still for mobile devices in 2015. As I have only played the PC version, I'm going to focus on that one. It also seems to be the easiest to get. Technically, mobile is also free to play, but on Steam, One Finger Death Punch is $4.99. And doesn't look like this was really rated by the ESRB, but I would say it probably would fit either a T or an M rating due to violence and blood. You're only beating up stick figures, but there is blood and dismemberment going on, so yeah, I'm not really sure where you'd stick that rating. One Finger Death Punch is a rather simplistic beat-em-up game. The whole game is played by either clicking the right or left mouse button to take out enemies that appear on your screen. Technically, you can use other buttons, other keys on your keyboard to use the left and right actions, but I've only really used the mouse, and that's been good enough for me. But you do have the option to use other keys if you want to. So these enemies that you fight can be killed in one hit, require a certain combo to defeat, or have you go into kind of a 1-1 battle that requires a longer combo and kind of acts like you're in this one-on-one duel between a certain types of characters. The enemies can also carry weapons that you can collect or pick up after they die, and these weapons can be melee like swords, staves, or clubs, or ranged like bow and arrows, bombs, and daggers. Now, there is no story here. There's just action. So you have this very simple concept that's just a lot of fun, but not a lot of development of why you're doing what you're doing. You're just going and kung fuing everybody just because you can. There are 2 general modes that you can play in the game, and that is level or survival. Level mode has you traversing a map where there are different stages, and you have to defeat a stage to be able to progress to the next stage, or stages sometimes, because the map forks and has multiple paths and kind of just sprawls all over and allows for a lot of freedom most of the time, but there is some, you still have to beat the level before the next one. You still have to progress. You can't just kind of skip ahead and miss ones that might be giving you a hard time. There are also skills that can be unlocked by traveling down certain paths that lead to these skills. These are usually ones that kind of lead to dead ends because you're getting a skill. Now, there are 21 of these skills, and they can do a bunch of different things. They can allow you to use certain weapons longer, increase the amount of arrows, daggers, or bombs that you'll get when you defeat somebody who has those, or do things like allow you to throw melee weapons or heal damage. There's a bunch of other skills, but each of the skills require so many kills before they can activate, and it's different depending on the skill that you have equipped, and it'll tell you how many skills you need to have this activate. You will start out with just 3 skill slots, but you will unlock more as you progress through the game. Now, as you progress through the map, you will find a variety of different modes that you have to beat throughout your journey. The basic mode tends to be the mob round, where you have to defeat a certain amount of enemies without being defeated to progress. There are other modes like retro film and thunderstorm mode, which add a different coloration to the levels and can make it harder to see what kind of enemies you're fighting, especially like the different enemies that require a certain combo. Like you won't necessarily see that they're a different color, but you can see the little combo things underneath them, so you have to kind of pay attention not just to the color of the guy, but also what's underneath them. There are rounds like the light sword and nunchaku rounds, where you are given these weapons and can one-hit basically every enemy except for the final one, where you have like one last duel with your light swords or your nunchucks, and it's all fun. But enemies will get progressively faster in these rounds until you defeat the amount required for the level. So it can get pretty crazy and really make you feel like you're pretty hyped by the end of those levels. There are also dagger and bomb rounds where you are throwing weapons at enemies so they don't reach you. There are others, but the one I want to kind of end with are the boss rounds. These are longer fights against only 1 or 2 enemies who have a lot of health and require you to keep doing different combos to do damage to them and defeat them. And this is ultimately the last stage of the game, will be a boss round. You fight the final boss kind of thing, but there are various boss rounds throughout the whole map. So after beating the final boss of the level mode, you will unlock the next difficulty mode. There are 3 different difficulties: Student, Master, and Grandmaster. Unlocking Master and Grandmaster difficulty will unlock another skill slot for you, allowing you to get up to 5 skill slots total. The other mode that you'll be playing a lot is called Survival Mode. If you've ever played a game with a survival mode, you'll know what to expect. You're basically trying to defeat as many enemies as possible without dying. You're trying to survive. Surprise. While this is a separate main mode, there are also certain places on the map that are survival stages as well and kind of have that mechanic where you just last as long as you can. They're actually pretty easy on the map because all you have to do is play it at all to get past it. There isn't a certain time frame you have to survive. You just, play it as long as you can, and then you get to move on. Survival mode, as opposed to the level mode, has 3 different versions. There is the basic survival, which has no real special things in it. Too much, it's pretty straightforward. But there is one thing that kind of sets it apart from just the normal beating people up, and that is the inclusion of bonus sections. And these take the form of either the light sword or nunchaku rounds, and will allow you to gain extra health by defeating a white colored enemy that appears about every 25 to 30 enemies defeated in these modes. And you get these bonus rounds, you see a bar kind of below your range meter, like whenever you know somebody's in your range, to be able to kind of tell how close you are to that next round. Like it'll fill up as you defeat enemies over time. The second type under the survival mode is blind survival, and it's a survival mode where you can't see when enemies are in your attack range. You don't have that attack range meter going on anymore, and you can't see the attack pattern of colored enemies. So it makes it a little tough. It's basically survival with a reduced UI. You don't have some of the added things like being able to tell whether left, right, left is the combo for that enemy coming or not. You just kind of have to remember the colors and kind of understand it by that, not by the cues underneath. Now, the hardest part here are some of those more complex combo enemies that you can't see what you have to do. So like some of the ones that you face a lot, you're probably going to have memorized by this time. So like the ones that just require like 2 or maybe 3 hits, you're probably going to have them pretty well memorized by then. But for the ones that are a little bit more complex or require a lot of, they switch sides on you a lot, like those ones are going to be the ones that are going to be tough in this round. That's going to be the challenge of the blind survival. Then the third survival mode is No Luca No. Now this mode imagines you have a cat named Luca who is starved for attention and keeps getting in front of your screen as you play One Finger Death Punch. So you have to keep pushing her out of the way. To do this, you simply have to move the mouse over the cat and it will leave for a bit. It just gives you one more thing to juggle, as if the game wasn't hard enough on its own. It's probably the strangest mode of the game, but it's still very difficult. From what I understand, this is kind of based off of another game that Silver Dollar did, but I don't really know what that is, and I've never played it. It's just something that I kind of vaguely aware of. Now, that's really all there is to One Finger Death Punch. It's not really a complicated game. So let's get into why I recommend that you give One Finger Death Punch a try. First, the simple but difficult gameplay really makes for an enjoyable experience. The game just feels so very smooth, and while it is difficult, it tends to feel pretty fair. That when you die or make a mistake, it's more often on you than it is the game making you fail or being cheap, or, sometimes it is tight. It is intentionally tight to where if you do make that mistake, you're gonna fail. But overall, I really like the feel of the game. Overall, it just feels fair and action-packed in the midst of it all. Now, the downside of the simplicity is that the game could start feeling a bit too repetitive. I've never really felt that way, but I'm sure that that's possible for others. Even if you do find it, repetitive after a little while, it's an easy game to play a couple rounds and move on to something else. Granted, I found it easy to get hooked playing it. Even if you're just like, I'm just gonna play a couple rounds, it's easy to kind of get hooked for a good amount of time each time I played, but that could just be me. As of right now, I have about 18 and a half hours in the game and still enjoy it when I sit down to play. I'm sure there's people who have far more hours than that than me, but that's kind of where I'm at it, and I still have a blast when I sit down and play it. And it's like, why haven't I given this a try recently? Second, for such a simple game, it makes you feel like a kung fu master. The game just makes you feel like you're this force to be reckoned with. When you're able to get a combo flowing, it's just a pretty awesome feeling experience. It can get crazy if you have to input combos and throwing weapons around and everything, but it's just a great feeling. You get this particularly in the light sword and nunchuck rounds, as they allow you to one-shot most enemies and are a bit faster paced, but for such a simple game, it does a great job at making you feel powerful. And it even does this when you aren't really doing the greatest, by the inclusion of the golden sword. Sometimes when your life is reduced down to one hit, it doesn't do this every single time, but the heavens will part and you will witness a golden sword descending and some pretty epic music start up. The golden sword is basically just a fancy version of the sword that doesn't get destroyed and is maybe a bit quicker. As I think those are the only things that I really notice about it. I could be wrong on that, but it gives you this sense of this desperate struggle and gives you kind of a rallying cry, even when you're not doing as good as you may like. Now lastly, the game just has some pretty great music that just fits the type of game that it is. It helps with the atmosphere and setting the vibe of kind of this action-packed kung fu style game. And I think the sound in general really helps this, as it does a good job of using sounds to really add the sense of power as you're punching, kicking, and slicing through scores of enemies, punching them into various objects that pop up in the background and hearing the crunches and the smacks. Like, it's just all very good at creating a whole atmosphere of action and feeling powerful and just a lot of fun. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that the graphical design may not be to your liking. You may be looking at this thinking stickmen and random backgrounds. Personally, the graphics didn't really bother me. In fact, I think it works really well for the simple style and gameplay that they've got going on. The only area that did bother me a little was the map for the level mode. It just seemed kind of ugly and a bit messy looking. It was also really hard to navigate, at least with the mouse alone. I didn't really realize it until just recently, but you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to help navigate it, and that is a lot more helpful, but there wasn't really anything that I remember seeing that gave you that kind of hint to do that. So I would say that the map overall, in terms of both graphics and just kind of general navigation, were probably the biggest disappointment or kind of struggle for me in the game. The overall graphics, they are simple and they might be a little bit underwhelming for you. It's kind of stick figures beating each other up, but I would say that the gameplay really makes up for it and that you can't get stuck on the graphics with this game. Now, it's hard for me to believe that a game using just 2 buttons can make you feel like such a kung fu master, can give you this sense of power, but somehow One Finger Death Punch does it. Despite its simplicity, it is a very challenging game, but even in the challenge, it presents a package that makes you feel like you're taking down hordes of enemies effortlessly sometimes. It may not be the prettiest game, but I think it does a lot right and creates an addictive beat-em-up experience that will make for hours of enjoyment. And that's why I'm giving One Finger Death Punch one of my gold stars. Have you played One Finger Death Punch? If you have, what did you think about it? If you haven't, does it look like a game that you'd be interested in? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to subscribe to my channel so that you can be notified when I release new recommendations or other video game content. It is my hope to help people find games that they will love and enjoy by sharing games that I have really enjoyed. And we'll see you next time for another game recommendation.